Hi everyone, my name's Nick. I am an Agile coach at ASOS. We are a fashion company, probably most of you are aware of us. If you're not, online retailer, so predominantly people buy our clothing products online, on the web, or using the mobile app. And our vision as an organisation is to be the world's leading destination for fashion-loving 20-somethings. And as you can imagine, you can't get to that without agility. So for context as to how we work, we have anywhere between 80 to 85 teams. If anyone's wondering what scaling method do we use, we don't use one. Sorry if any safe or less fans in the world that wanted a bit of free marketing. Teams are free to choose their way of working as long as it aligns with our principles of technical excellence, fast feedback, and agility. To give you some context as to how frequent we're changing, we do anywhere from 10 to 15,000 deployments a month. So there's a lot of change going on. And we also apply lean agile techniques when it comes to things like our supply chain. So we're always looking for ways to improve our organization and improve the flow of work, the flow of value for our fashion-loving 20-somethings. Talk today is going to be about blockers, and where I believe as an industry maybe we're missing a trick, and give you some insights as to ways you can measure the impact of being blocked across your teams and your organization. Before we start, a bit about me and what inspires me as a practitioner. One of the people that inspires me is a guy called Sean Carter. You might know him by his stage name of Jay-Z. And he said this in one of his tracks, Reminder, where he said, men lie, women lie, numbers don't. So when it comes to a coach, I'm very much one that's number-driven, data-driven. I recognize that sometimes numbers do tell a lie. I'm not completely, dogmatic about that statement. But I like to use data-driven techniques when it comes to different parts of the organization that I work with, so we can measure the impact as to if we're actually tangibly improving things from a ways of working perspective. And, when it comes to being blocked, this is probably a common occurrence that people have experienced. Maybe you're gathered around working together as a team, or someone's on a stand-up and comes out with this statement, in that they think that they're blocked, and work gets blocked often, and quite regularly we lose track of when the actual blocker occurred, and sometimes we're not even aware as to how we may be blocking other teams that are dependent on us. So I think it's important for us to baseline as to when we say we're blocked, what does that mean? And for me, a good definition, one that I think is pretty agnostic of context, is being blocked is being unable to start or finish something that we want or need to do. So I used to be of the mind that it was just things that were in progress, but actually if there's things that you want to start and you can't because of a blocker, and that's the highest value thing, then I think there's a good case for arguing that that's blocked as well. So if you want a loose definition as to what we mean by being blocked, I think this is a good one. Unblockers, they occur often, and they can manifest themselves at any time, and pretty much everything will be blocked at one point or another. And if you think that things aren't getting blocked, chances are you've not dug deep enough as to what are the reasons behind blockers that teams face. But you can have things like technical environment issues, maybe things like our test environment goes down. So we can't validate a piece of work that we've been working on, we can't test it, we can't get feedback as to if it's working or not, and we're blocked. We can't progress it through our board, through the next part of our workflow. Or it can be things like where we have internal dependencies. So maybe we're changing terms and conditions on maybe one of our journeys, and we need to get input from legal, and we're waiting to hear back from them, and until we hear back from them, we're blocked. Or maybe we're dealing with a higher level of data protection, and therefore we're waiting to hear back from security, and again, we're blocked. We can't move things forward. Or we work with third parties, and we have that at ASOS, and sometimes we're dependent on vendors, so we're waiting to hear back as to we found a problem in their core product and waiting to hear if they're going to fix it. Or maybe we fix something and we're waiting for vendors to hear back. We're waiting to hear back from vendors as to, is the fix we've implemented the right thing? It can be as simple as delayed feedback, right? So we built something, we're waiting to hear back from the business and the rest of the organization as to the thing we've built, is it working or not? So that's another reason why work gets blocked. And then the final one, which happens quite a lot, is it's just more complex than we thought. So we started work on this, we thought we understood it, we thought we got it, but actually there's a lot more to it than that, and we're not quite sure how to progress. So these are kind of 5 of the common reasons that I've experienced over the years in terms of why work gets blocked. And then what happens is, those passionate about flow amongst us, they'll be recognizing that, look, our work keeps getting blocked in development, and those that are really passionate will say it's something, we need to do something about it, right? So we need to improve flow, we need to focus on these blockers. And we're going to be transparent. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an activity to our Kanban board called blocked. And this is something to be mindful of. The problem with a blocked column is your Kanban board really should be a depiction of your value discovery process, your workflow. So if you include a column of blocked, that implies you're planning to be blocked. But also when work gets blocked and you just put it in a blocked column, you create this culture of out of sight, out of mind, right? So just put it in the blocked column, focus on the next thing. And it's not visible where the blocker has actually occurred. Has it occurred as part of development? Has it occurred as part of discovery? Is it part of testing? By having stuff that we just throw in a block column, we can't easily see that. Compared to the example on the right-hand side, where we can see clearly that the main focus for us should be in the build column. Yeah, so we've got two things that are blocked there. And then we should move on to the test column and look at unblocking things there. What you also find with teams when it comes to talking about Kanban boards is things like definitions of done. I'd like to think most people work in teams where you have a definition of done. If you don't, then I'm worried. Definition of done, shared criteria for when we say something's done, we all know what that means. It should be kind of determined by the team. It should be context specific. You shouldn't copy and paste a definition of done. And it can be things like, it's deployed to production, there's no open defects, we've updated documentation, all our test pass, etc. And other teams may have things like a definition of ready. I'm not a big fan of definitions of ready. I've got to be honest, most of our teams at ASOS don't use them. We find that they encourage stage gate type behaviors. So we need to have everything before we start something, and teams aren't willing to be pragmatic and collaborate. But there's an example there as to what one might look like for your team. So it can be things like you've got description and acceptance criteria defined. You've got things like if it's a bug, you've got steps to reproduce. Or if you need design information like wireframes and mock-ups, that you've got them as part of the story and you can start work on it. What we find with our teams that's quite common is the concept of process policies. So these are things that are defined criteria for when something moves from one column to the next on our board, what needs to be in place. So if you're moving from in development to code review, then you need things like unit test coverage is 100%, you create a pull request, any functional tests have been added that are relevant to the story, or if you're moving from in testing to ready for release, then it can be all our automated test pass, and it could be things like we've validated against the acceptance criteria, we've got UI, UX, product people that have inputted, so we know as to if this is the right thing or not, rather than just put it in the ready to release column and we don't know. But this kind of thing happens, where work gets blocked. So we add the labels to it and we can see those things are blocked. And then this kind of thing happens, where the team just look at each other blankly and say, well, what do we do now? We've marked it as blocked, what should we do? And this is where kind of we need to reset as to thinking about a definition of blocked and what does being blocked actually mean. Some useful nudges from a thinking perspective are things like, well, how much time needs to pass before something's marked as blocked? So if you start something, you email someone and you don't get a response within an hour, probably not right to mark it as blocked. But if you get a response that's maybe you don't get something for 7 days and you still can't move it forward, then it's probably right to mark it as blocked. You need to think about how you're going to identify stuff as being blocked. Are you going to have a blocked swim lane? Are you going to use tags? Are you going to use labels? And when it is blocked, are you going to call out what the blocker is? So that's visible to people so they know as to what is the thing that is slowing us down. You also need to think about, do blockers count towards your WIP limit? So if you've got a WIP limit for your Kanban system, whether it's a cumulative WIP or a WIP per stage, then you need to think about, okay, are we allowed to go over our WIP limit if something has been blocked for 1 day, 1 week, 1 month? Because after time, you probably think it's just been blocked for too long, so it doesn't really matter if we go over the limit because we're not actually working on it. And then the final thing to think about is, at what point do you as a team actually say, do you know what, this has just been blocked for too long, let's just forget it, let's just delete it from the backlog. If you delete it, if it's that important, it'll come back around. And if you want some kind of useful nudges around managing blockers, recommend having a read of the Kanban Pocket Guide. So it's short, free book, you can read it in an evening, just gives you some insight as to how you might want to improve your flow of work. And what we kind of could be going towards as a team is thinking about a definition of blocked. So we've got definitions ready, definitions are done, but what is our definition of blocked? And teams will often ask this, like, what actually constitutes stuff being blocked? And we had the loose definition at the beginning as to, being unable to start or finish something. But we can use things like, okay, adding the blocker reason. We need to agree that as a team, so you don't just mark it as blocked, we know the reason why. And if we can't progress something after more than 2 days, then that's a suitable time frame to mark it as blocked. And if it's been blocked for more than 7 days, then it's okay to go above our WIP limit. And if it's been blocked for more than 60 days, then just delete it from the backlog, right? If it's that important, it'll come back around. And really, as an industry, I think the impact of blockers is one of the biggest blind spots we have when it comes to new ways of working. Flow efficiency, so the ratio of actual time spent working on items, is anywhere from 5 to 10% for most organizations. So that's a lot of time work is sat around waiting. So we need to be doing more as an industry to understand the impact that's having and looking at it across the teams in our organization. And it's core to most frameworks, most ways of working. So if you're in an organization that just uses Scrum, this is from the Scrum Guide. So the Scrum Master causes the removal of impediments from the Scrum team's progress. And if you're more of a Kanban type organization, I don't view them as binary things, right? I don't think you should choose between the two. You should mix and blend what's right for your context. One of the things within the Kanban guide is about active management of items in a workflow on a board is about unblocking blocked work, right? So it's core to those two ways of working. And maybe you're a delivery manager or an agile delivery manager. It's core to your role that you should be removing obstacles and blockers. This is from Emily Webber's blog about the day in the life of a delivery manager. Generally, everything Emily does is amazing, I find, and she's a great inspiration. But you know, when you're thinking about that role, it's core to your role to be removing obstacles and blockers. And this is stuff at team level, right? But what about as an organization? We've got John Smart's book, Sooner, Safer, Happier. Fantastic read about kind of agility and scaling patterns and anti-patterns. And one of the key things from that book is about impediments are not in the path, impediments are the path. So that's pointing to you the direction you need to go in order to improve your way of working. What should you be focusing on? You should be focusing on those impediments, those blockers, those things that are actually slowing you down. If you go after those, chances are you'll improve the way of working for teams. And a couple other things that have inspired me over the years. Mark Bergauer did a talk, I think it was in 2016, I saw this, where he talks about Maslow's work and new psyche management and kind of distilling that for what it means like for managers in this modern environment where we have cross-functional, self-organizing, empowered teams. What role do managers play? And the two things for managers to try that Mark mentions in his talk are make it easy to say no to you. But the second one is particularly relevant to today's session, which is ask first, what can I do to help you do your job better? Now, if you think about the role as to how managers can help teams, it's by removing blockers. So the insights, the data around blockers is how managers can be helping when it comes to teams improving the flow of their work. And then the other talk that's kind of stuck with me over the years is this one from Jay Bloom. It's a kind of experience report around the use of data and metrics. And he talks around kind of, just visualizing things for the sake of it. We have to visualize things that actually lead to action. And data needs to trigger visits to the Gemba. So the Gemba being the work to go see, that's what data needs to do. You shouldn't just visualize things because you can. It needs to prompt action. It needs to prompt people to go and see and understand and help. So really, when we're talking about blockers, data on blockers, it needs to be an invitation to the Gemba for leaders. It needs to be something that invites them to go see, learn, and help the teams. And then one other person that's really inspired me over the years, and if you don't know who he is, I'd firmly encourage you to look him up. Troy McGuinness, probably the leading person in our industry when it comes to data and metrics. Pretty much everything Troy does, he gives away for free. So it's all Excel spreadsheets. So if you want to get started using data and metrics, have a look at Troy's stuff. Absolutely brilliant. And one of the things that he tweeted a few months back was a common question he gets around Agile and metrics, because he's the go-to person that people go and ask, is where do you start? And his view is to use data to find systemic issues, to find things that are wrong across teams, rather than going deep on a single team. So coming back to our kind of Agile comic strip, we had our stories that were getting blocked in development, and we were like, okay, it's about time we do something about this in order to improve the flow of our work. And the mindset to have is this one. So we need to focus on preventing our work, our stories from getting blocked, and actually get better at unblocking them. And that's kind of what we're going to look at here. So we're going to look at some of the metrics that we have set up for our teams when it comes to measuring blockers, and how you might use them and the patterns and anti-patterns that you might see. First one, and these are all real examples from real teams, is currently blocked items. So each item ID is on the left-hand side, and for context, we have some teams use Jira, some teams use Azure DevOps. We have tools that are agnostic of what tool the team uses in order to visualize it. And we've got, as the bar chart, the number of days the item has been blocked for. And you can see here we've got some formatting, so the one that's been blocked the longest is highlighted in blue. So that item WD20364 has been blocked for 7 weeks, 49 days. And this is where, as a team, you need to be using this as part of your conversations when you're looking at what do you start next. What you should probably be looking at is what's blocked currently and how can we unblock it. And you should prioritize that over starting something new. And what we see are patterns or anti-patterns like this one. So teams where they've blocked something and forgotten about it. So we've got the item at the top here. It's been blocked for 395 days, so over a year. So this is a common face that I make as an Agile coach. When I see things like this, I'm like, why not just delete it? Why not just get rid of it? And then you look at the ones that are just below that, so 109 days, 108 days. So you've got to be thinking as a team as to what are we actually doing here when we mark stuff as blocked? Do we care? Are we going to do anything about it? So try to avoid the trap of forgotten blockers. The next thing we see with this chart is out of sight, out of mind behavior. And it's always a bad sign when you look at something with blockers and there's a scroll bar. That means you've got lots of things that are blocked. So here we can see what's happening with this team is they're marking stuff as blocked, but then they're just going on to something else and something else and something else and something else. And that's why there are so many bars on the chart here. That means that lots of work is starting and then getting blocked, or they're wanting to start and it's not getting blocked, and not doing anything about it, which is kind of highlighted by the length of some of the bars on the chart. So that's kind of what I would determine is maybe a leading measure for teams when looking at how do you manage blockers. If you don't take care of things like this, if they have long bars, then chances are you're going to get long cycle times. Long cycle times tend to mean frustrated stakeholders. The second chart is blocker frequency. So this just looks at, on a given day, how many items were marked as blocked. And it's supported by a trend line. So you can see that dashed grey line there. So that's a trend it's going in. And we use a step line chart to show the increase on a given day. Really, you want this to be low or trending downward. And you should be focusing on reducing the frequency of blockers occurring. Here we see things like teams that are heading in the wrong direction, right? So this is trending upward, meaning that more blockers are occurring for that particular team. So chances are they need to do something about it. They need to maybe use this as part of a retrospective, understand why work keeps getting blocked, and use this to improve. And then you also have things like the day it all went wrong. So this is where there's a big spike and suddenly everything became blocked. Maybe the environment went down, maybe Wi-Fi stopped working in the office, I don't know. But again, you can use this as a particular data point in your retrospective and say, okay, what happened here? How could we prevent that occurring again? And then measure the impact over the coming months to see if it actually occurs. The third chart is the mean time to unblock chart. So this is a play on traditional DevOps metrics that you might see, like mean time to recovery, mean time between failures. So looking at the average time it takes us to unblock things. So for a given week, of the items that were unblocked, how long on average did it take? So for this particular chart, you can see it's trending in the wrong direction. It's trending upward, meaning it's taking more time to unblock things. And we've also got that big spike of that 74, meaning for the items unblocked on that week, the average time to unblock them was 74 days, so about 2.5 months, which is quite a long time. Here we have things like seeing cause for concern. So this is where it's trending upward, right? It's not giving us a story that we want. And you've got to look at it as to, well, as a team, when we're getting blocked, are we actually doing anything about it? Or we've got weeks where we have outliers. So this particular week, the average time was 223 days to unblock something. So that's a big cause for concern as to what happened with that. Why did that take so long to unblock? Did we want to start it and we weren't ready to? It just prompts better questions as a team. And then the other chart, kind of when the pattern that you see with this is maybe it is, quite a stable trend line or even trending slightly downward, but you've got to ask yourself, could we be doing better? So for this particular team, we can see it's trending relatively level, but it's around the 20-day mark, so just under 3 weeks to unblock things once they're blocked. So if this team's working in a 2-week sprint cycle, probably not a good thing, right? That means that it takes us longer to unblock things than it does the sprint duration. So that's a cause for concern as a team as to, are we actually prioritizing flow of work, or are we just moving on to the next? And then the final of the 4 charts that we encourage teams to use is this days lost to being blocked. Now, it's a deliberately confrontational title of a chart. I've been told it's somewhat divisive. So this looks at a particular item that was completed, what proportion of its cycle time was spent blocked versus not blocked. So really, if you've got lots of orange bars here, it means you're not taking care of blockers. If you've got long bars, it means you've got long cycle times. If you've got long bars and the majority of that bar is orange, like the one at the top, that means the vast majority of the time that work spent blocked versus not blocked. So the very top one there took 62 days, so that's just over 2 months, and 54 of those 62 were spent blocked. So that's a cause for concern as a team. Again, the Jackie Chan meme makes an appearance here. So this is something that took 483 days, which in itself is a problem, but 459 of the 483 days were spent being blocked. So that means there's probably something that's not quite right there. And then the other instance of the chart is similar to the first chart where we saw a scroll bar. Anytime you see a scroll bar, something's probably not right. Here we've just got lots of orange, right? So that means that we're just losing too much time to being lost with this particular team. So lots of time being blocked, and it doesn't feel like we're really doing anything about it. And this is stuff at team level, and it's helpful, you know, if you're a coach, or scrum master, delivery manager, whatever your role is. But for true impact, what we need to do is look at it across the organization. And blockers are pretty much kind of, in my view, agnostic of framework. So aggregating in this instance, I think, is okay. We're not doing anything bad like comparing story points, for example. And this is actually the data for our teams across ASOS as of, I think it might have been Wednesday last week I did this. So currently right now, about 250 items that are blocked at kind of story level. For items that are completed since the start of the year, we've lost 19,273 days to being blocked. Quite a lot. 981 times since the start of the year, work has gotten blocked, and takes us just over a month on average to unblock things. So when you think about, as an organization, we still have steps to improve. You know, we might be focusing a lot on technical excellence, but there's improvement needed here. So these numbers aren't great. And you might be thinking, well, you know, that's just ASOS. What's it like somewhere else? This is from a previous organization I worked at. And if you thought the ASOS numbers were bad, this is on a whole nother level. This is looking at annual figures for the organization. So over 2,500 items currently blocked, 106,000 days lost to being blocked, work blocked over 10,000 times in a year, and just over 3 weeks on average to unblock things. And for myself as a coach in this organization, this was kind of the face I made at the time. Again, like, what's going on here? We're meant to be about agility, we're meant to be about flow, and it seems to me like we're not really doing anything about it. We could be doing more. Now, the problem with these charts is they're just charts. And I really like this quote from a guy called Alberto Cairo. He's very famous in the data visualization world, not the Agile world. And his quote is kind of, a chart shows only what it shows and nothing else. And why that's relevant for what we're looking at here is these charts, whilst they're useful, none of them provide the reasons behind why work is getting blocked. And if you're going to use these kind of things, you need to be prepared to go further in terms of uncovering the reasons why. So you need to be prepared to work with teams to understand what are the reasons those blockers are occurring, not just looking at the number itself. And only then will you know, as a coach, you know, if you're coaching at the organizational level, the real areas that you should be going after when it comes to improving the way of working. And this is kind of where we are on our journey as an organization. I want to shout out to one of our QA people, Gary, who works in our Paytech platform. And when I first joined ASOS, he was telling me about how they've tried to understand what their blockers and impediments are in the past, but the whole thing became a process, so much so that raising the impediment became an impediment. And what we and Gary worked through was kind of the most lightweight way we could understand what the blockers were that teams were facing. And this is just within our kind of Paytech platform over the last couple of months. So here we can see that the most common blocker that these teams face is around environments. And what we've actually done is taking it further to drill down into that. So here we can start to see, well, what is the thing that happens in the environment? And the top two of those reasons being test environment failure and orders that get stuck, orders that people are trying to place on ASOS.com. And then when we go even further, we can start to see, well, what environments specifically are those? So when we want to know as to where are our pain points, what should we be going after in terms of improvement, this is a lot easier, right? And this may be things that the team themselves could control, or it may be in this instance, maybe want to shut down one of the environments, or we want to rebuild it. And then we can look at things like the cost of running those environments and actually the impact the blocker is having in relation to the cost implications for the organization. So this is where we're kind of going when it comes to taking the blockers further. And this is really useful because then you can start to quantify the impact you're having around improvements and inform the direction as to where you go next. So we can see with this chart, for example, that the blockers that are happening less frequently when we compare them month on month are things like organizational ones, third parties, technical and tooling, because all those bars are going down mean they're happening less frequently. Now, we need to also bear in mind that correlation does not equal causation. So it doesn't necessarily mean that just because of the improvements we've made, it's improved these things. It could just be people forgot to tag it, for example. But at least gives some insight as to, could we be on the right path? Are these blockers occurring less frequently? As well as, for future months, what should we be focusing on? And this is where the line is going up. So the two most common ones that we're seeing are environment and access issues. They've increased in the month from May to June. So leaders, where do we need your help? Where do we need to go improve? Those are the two areas, right? Those are the two things for us to focus on. But it also is a balancing act for us as an organization. We have to balance team agility and business agility. So this is from our saved items team, and another shout out to the lead engineer, Francis, for this, working on what are the reasons why work gets blocked. And we've only got a small list. The top one highlighted is awaiting BAU. So that's where team is working on a story, but they can't finish it because of decisions the organization has made. And one of the things this week, for example, is we're running a live kind of promotion on Instagram where people each day can vote as to what discount they get on ASOS. And it could be something like 25% off all items or 20% off men's thongs. All items one, in case anyone's wondering. And so this is kind of on the app right now. So if people use that code, they can get a discount. But because we're running this promotion, it means that more people are going to be going to the website, more people are going to look at their saved items. So Francis and his team can't release these new things they've been working on because they're supporting the organization in scaling to red to allow for, an increased number of concurrent users. And this is a challenge where we're at as an organization, right? Are we really blocked? Because at the end of the day, we need to sell physical products in order to, get revenue and pay our people and generate profits. But at a team level, the team is blocked. And that's what we're going to be looking at the coming months as to, well, what are the real blockers for us as an organization versus stuff at team level? And in some instances, you're going to have blockers. There are going to be blockers that, it's just part of the course. It's part of our way of working. And I think this is a good example as to what they're like for our organization. And just in closing, some of you might be sat there thinking, well, what do you think about dependencies? My view on dependencies is that they are blockers that are waiting to happen. So you might have lots of dependencies and chances are those blockers are going to occur. And what I'm seeing in the kind of people that I talk to in the industry and the organizations I've been in is there's a new cottage industry evolving. And that is what we call maybe the 21st century PMO or transformation office or agile office, whatever buzzword you want to give it. And that's where you have teams of people that report on dependencies. And sometimes it's effective. I'd argue both of these visualizations are not. And they're not focused on actually reducing the frequency of dependencies and actually trying to resolve those things at an organizational level so they don't happen again. They're just focusing on just reporting if things are on track or not. And that leads again to a face like this, where people aren't actually doing anything to really help the way of working. They're just visualizing and reporting and measuring things because they can, rather than it actually being well-intentioned in improving the outcomes for the organization. And a message for kind of people that are maybe in environments like this and you use things like safe or red string, you're not going to find salvation in it, right? So just because it looks pretty on a board and you've linked stuff with red string, if you're not actually trying to see the impact of these blockers, if you're not trying to improve them, if you're not trying to reduce the frequency of them, you won't find salvation. It might make you feel good because it looks good, but it's not actually going to tangibly improve your way of working as an organization. So in summary, key takeaway points for me that I hope you take away from this session is, well, what does being blocked mean? Being blocked is being unable to start or finish something that we want or need to do. And block metrics provide one of the biggest insight when it comes to what are our impediments to flow. And those could be impediments at a team level or at an organizational level. To get started with these things, when I send out the slides, all the charts that are generated here, they're from free tooling that's out there. It's on GitHub. And in terms of if you want to get started, all you need is the date and time when something was blocked and unblocked. And that will help you create most of these charts. Now, if you want to dig deeper and find the reasons why, you need to go a little bit further. But it's really easy to get started. There's not really many barriers to entry when it comes to this. And use blocker metrics to continuously improve, right? So at team level, really look at reducing the frequency, reduce the time when it comes to unblocking things, and at an organizational level, use them as the invitation to the Gemba for leaders. And if you want to know where to start, I'd consider tracking what's currently blocked at the minute, because those are leading indicators for stuff that's in progress right now. You've got how frequently blockers are occurring, how long does it take us on average to unblock things, so the mean time to unblocked, and the days lost to being blocked. And I think that's it. So chance for people to ask questions. Thank you.
Is this on? Cool. Yeah, we have time. We've got 10 minutes. So questions, this guy.
Loads of interesting stuff, thank you. You mentioned some types of block, like when it goes to security or another team. If you've got some kind of work that you know will go there and it always takes a few days, would you visualize that as part of your process and still look to reduce it in future, or is it worth having that as blocked even when it's expected?
So what I've done in the past, and I can only talk to my lived experience, of course, is I think tagging it as blocked. So if it was blocked because of security, if you put block-security on the tag, and then if that's something that it sounds like it's outside of your control, because it's just how the organization works, I would just quantify that data and then take it to the leader in your tech organization and say, okay, this is how we work currently. If you want to improve flow, this is how we could. This is how we could, and this is the impact it's having. So all I would say is if there are things outside of your control that you can't change, capture the data and use that to drive the conversation. And then for me, that's when you understand that if an organization is serious about agility.
Cool. I got another one over here.
Thank you. Fascinating talk. Loved it. I wanted to know some advice for when you've worked with teams, or maybe not experienced this, but I've done some coaching with teams where something's been blocked and they've wanted to push it back into the backlog so it just hides in and amongst things, and there's this real reluctance to let go of it because it was so important. I know you mentioned a little bit about trying to get people to realize that it's not that critical, but I think there's sometimes an anxiety with teams that a backlog is a catch-all.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's two ways you can handle it. Generally, when it happens the first time, I just let it play out. So if they want to keep it there, cool. If they want to move it backwards, fine. Go with whatever the team decides. If it keeps happening, then I think you propose it as an experiment to the team. So, okay, this keeps happening. Let's try delete it and then see if it comes back. And then if it doesn't, great. If it does, then you just know, okay, that wasn't the right thing to do, so probably the team was right. I tend to encourage teams to be more ruthless when it comes to the backlog. But part of that as well comes with where teams are at and how stable they are, how long they've been together. If they're newly formed teams and it's delete stuff from the backlog, then probably not the right suggestion. But if they've been together a while, then sometimes that type of nudge is good for them.
Cool. Got another one over here.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Great presentation. I'm curious to know why these are the ones you've picked to begin with, like consider tracking. one of your slides is kind of like root cause analysis. What trying to get teams to do that like, and I'd know that as a kind of Pareto analysis, right? If you solve 20% of these type of problems and 80% of your problems are going to go away, I'd have thought that tracking that initially would have been a great place to start, because if you solve that small chunk of type of problems, it's going to drive those issues down really quickly, but it's not one of the first places that you start.
Yeah, so the reason for going with this is mainly due to simplicity of the data's already captured for most teams. And therefore, putting it in a template so teams can block different ways. So at ASOS, we have teams that use custom fields, they use tags, and they use swim lanes. And our solution, it caters for all of those, so we're not saying block this only way. But we wanted something that was simple for teams to consume and connect to and visualize, that they could then share with other teams. So there's learning across the teams then. What we want to get to is some of that more in-depth kind of 5 whys, and then showcase that as social proof for others. And that's kind of those 2 teams I mentioned where they're kind of going to each granular level. That's where we want to get to eventually. But right now, just so teams are aware of it, that's why we've gone with these, because the data's kind of already there for most teams. Cool.
Any more questions? Oh my goodness, there's like a million hands. I'll start at the back and come forward if that's all right.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I'm just pondering on this from a kind of theory of constraints kind of perspective, and kind of organizationally trying to identify the bottleneck, the kind of like the constraint in the business. Like, have you taken it to that kind of conclusion?
Not yet, but that's where I'd like us to get to. In the organisation I showed previously where the numbers were, we started to look at some of the reasons why, and it was stuff that it was clear there was a lack of awareness as to what a real constraint is. So, for example, the most common impediment we saw raised was COVID. And it's kind of like, yeah, we can't solve a global pandemic as an Agile coach. So, as much as we try. So, we're not there yet, but it's where I'd like us to get to. And it's something where, so we've got a new CEO, Jose, and one of the things he's asking different parts of the organization is essentially, where could we improve things to, and the language he used was go faster, and I think we'd all agree speed isn't everything. For us, we'd be focused on what could we do to improve flow. And that, where we're nudging a few teams, ultimately where we want to get to is, okay, at an organization level, what's the biggest constraint? And is that at the team or is it upstream? We have the hunch it's upstream, and it's more the portfolio process. But we're not there yet, but it's certainly my aspiration to get there.
I'm sure there was one down the front. I saw a hand. Amazing.
Thank you for the talk. Really food for thought. I tend to not agree with you about numbers don't lie. Men lie, women lie, and they use numbers to lie. So yeah, I think that numbers are the most powerful tool to manipulate, to lie. So my question is, how do you do using your numbers to not manipulate the numbers that you have, so that some people, some stakeholders use them in their...
So I'm definitely not a person that says numbers. They never lie. Of course, there are instances where you see stuff and you're like, really? That doesn't seem right. When it comes to getting teams more conscious around data, a few things we do. Everything generally we do as a coach is invitation over infliction. So these tools are there if teams want to use them, but we're not going to force them. So they have to want to look at that data. So if they don't want to, that's fine. I'll still work with them. The other thing we do is we try to create experiential learning for people before they look at these kind of things with dummy data, fake teams, so they can learn in a safe space, so they're comfortable looking at numbers. Other things that we do, for example, if we look at team cycle time, and it seems really long, we work with the teams to understand, well, that number probably isn't right. So if it's, 300 days to do a story, for example, and we work to understand more of their context as to, are we starting the cycle timers too soon? And even, is that a focus for you right now? And in some teams, flow metrics, block metrics, they're not even at that point. They just want happier people. And some of that is very hard to measure. You can't really put a number as to, number of people having conversations at work. Not really a metric, is it? So I do think there are some things where we just outright say, look, just don't try and measure it. Just forget it and just focus on observation, and the indicators will be in things like, retention of people, are people happier? Numbers don't always give the answer.
We've got 2 minutes. We've got one more question.
I'm just curious, because you've got such a large number of teams, if you ever end up with a kind of blocker cascade, one team is blocked and it blocks another team and it blocks another team and it blocks another team, or are they quite kind of ring-fenced in what they work on?
Most of there are some instances where it happens, not to the point where I'd say it's worth measuring yet. We're quite fortunate at ASOS that the underlying architecture is very good. So teams are pretty self-contained, and there's minimal dependencies. There are still some. It tends to be more the wider organization, and because it's fast fashion, it's constantly moving as an industry. So if there are internal dependencies blockers, it tends to be the rest of our business and the tech business rather than other tech teams. But I recognize a lot of organizations don't have that.
We've got time for one more if anyone has anything else. Otherwise, I'm going to stand on the stage and that's it. No more time. I'm doing it. Final chance! Okay, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.